don't know why this always feel like it takes longer than it used to. Okay, now we're live. Perfect. Okay. Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cannabis Marketing Live. I am your host, Jake Litke. Today we have Chelsea Burns as our guest. We are going to talk about psychology and marketing, how they tie together. We're going to weave that into some specific topics, how it relates to cannabis. And we did mention earlier talking about discounting as a tactic. We'll get into the discounting portion. Initially, we want to lay some groundwork about marketing and psychology, how they're connected. And we'll be looking at this from the broad scope of marketing in general. So large brands that you may have heard of, as well as how that applies within the cannabis industry specifically. Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us. Could you give everyone just a brief background about what you're doing today and your journey to get here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me today, Jake. I'm excited to be here. So, I am Chelsea Burns. I am the founder and CEO of the Marketing Psychologist and the co-founder of Mumford and Burns Consulting. And so, what I do is I take 16 years of in-house marketing experience and I combine it with applied psychology. I have a master's in consumer and organizational psych from the University of Southern California. And that combination is really kind of the catalyst for taking academic and research-backed information and make it applicable for people to put into practice in their business.
Great. Um, that sounds complicated, but I know that there's a lot of ways that you can talk about marketing and describe it, but I think that there are some core principles that I tend to get forgotten, especially that on the cannabis side where we work mostly, there's a lot of newer companies, right? And a lot of startup companies, and frequently they don't have a lot of marketing expertise or marketing executives. And so people tend to think about marketing as advertising, and more specifically, advertising in the sense that send someone an offer and they'll buy your product,
Mhm.
right? And we have conversations like this all the time. And one of the things I like to do is take a really all the steps back, right? And talk about marketing. And the way I talk about it is really marketing is about storytelling, right?
Mhm.
And storytelling is stories are what human beings connect with. And I kind of keep it at that broad level because that explains it in relatively simple terms. And then you can start to talk about your marketing efforts as how are you telling a story to your consumers about your brand.
Yeah.
Um, so I'd love to hear how you iterate from that sort of very kind of Fisher Price level of marketing explanation and how you layer psychology and we can get into more specific details as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of picking it up from there, in addition to telling your story, you're building a relationship. And so I would say, yes, we're telling a story, but we're also trying to create some two-way dialogue. And so when we think about marketing psychology, there's a great book called The Human Brand, and it digs into human beings with brand and logo all the way back to basically the beginning of time, especially when we lived in tight-knit communities where your face was your first logo and your reputation was your brand. And so to skip a whole bunch of jargon and get to the meat of it, people do a couple of things psychologically with your brand and your company right off the bat. They gauge warmth and they gauge competence. And what this used to mean back when we were trying to survive was, are you going to harm me? Right? And are you smart enough to do so? What that means for us now is, are you going to help me with your product or service? Or are you going to be detriment to me? Also, are you smart enough to do either one of those things? So primally, we're still hardwired to operate like that. And so that's kind of how I would up level it from, yeah, we're telling a story to start a conversation, to build a relationship, but we immediately have to let people know what that relationship's going to look like.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it makes even more sense for direct consumer brands that are selling something online, especially if their primary channel is going to be they're doing paid marketing, right? Because if you're
Mhm.
doing paid marketing, you're by definition generally finding people that may are likely not aware of what you're selling, have not heard of your brand. And so I see a lot of people launch direct consumer products online and they believe in their product and they think it's great and it probably is great. they put up a website and they have their shop and they have, here's my great product and here's a nice picture of it. And then they get surprised why when people go to the site, they don't buy the product
Mm-hmm.
because they miss the part where you have to tell the consumer a story that includes building trust, showing,
Right.
social proof, all of those types of things. Um, and what you're saying layers into that because I usually, especially on like for new products online, like cannabis products, you're fighting a couple of headwinds. One is you're in a category of products that most people don't really understand. It's complicated and new. It's also a space that's crowded with not great actors in it also. So
Mm-hmm.
you've got an education barrier, you have a big trust barrier. And so let's just hypothetically say you've got a new brand, they've got a real product, but no brand awareness. Um, and they come to you and say, how do I, use psychology in a digital medium to convey the value and trust that I want to? How do you even start that conversation?
Yeah. So what you're going to notice in my answers is that I go from here, pull it up here and bring it back down. And so, you hear a lot of talk about value proposition in marketing,
Mhm.
right? But that is typically rather one way. It's about what you're putting out. And everything that I do, because it's psychology, we have to hold space for the fact that everything's two-way. Everything's relational. And so what I would say is, it's not necessarily about your value proposition that you're putting out there, which is some of it. It's the value aspiration. And so this is a term I've started using that is rooted in psychology. There was a study done on why people purchase jeans, and they did just your typical survey, right? You get on, you answer the questions. People answered based off of all these things, the color, the comfort, the cut, the price, whatever. Then they followed up and they did these in-depth interviews. And what they found was it was really actually none of those things. Those may have fed into it, but people bought the jeans that made them feel like the transformed versions of themselves they wanted to be.
Okay.
They're future versions of them, right? What they aspired to be. And so what I typically do is sit down with people and say, we got to figure out, we got to identify the value aspiration of the people you're talking to. So, yes, you're absolutely right. When they land on that page, especially from an ad, you have to give them the who, what, when, where, why, how. You
Mhm.
have to tell them all the people who also like it. But how are you aligning with the aspiration of how they want to feel? And it may sound a little woo-woo, but if you start to really address that in the messaging, you'll watch those conversions start to happen because 95% of our decision making is in the subconscious brain.
Yeah.
Very little of it are we logically, cognitively sitting here going, oh, yes, this, that, the other. It's how we feel. And so that messaging point, the colors, the way you lay out your page, that all feeds into does it align with where that person wants to go after they purchase your product?
Yeah. That makes sense. And I've seen, many, many landing pages. And I've actually seen some landing pages that when I first looked at it, I was like, this is not very good because it was very, very plain, mostly text. It wasn't
Hmm.
it wasn't slick in any way, shape, or form. It looked like a kind of an old blog post from 10 years ago. Converted really well though, because it was a long form piece of content and it was telling a story, right, about
Hmm.
the person who created the product. And it was like it was many, I must have been 10,000 words. It was a lot of
Oh,
content.
wow.
But by the
Yeah.
time you got to the end of it, you're like, oh, I want this product now. They
Hmm.
chose text as their medium, and that worked pretty well. That's uncommon that someone has such a good story like that. Um, but in terms of value, that's another thing that I sometimes tell people about. Your interaction as a brand with consumers is a value exchange, right? And
Hmm.
even the simple act of advertising, the consumer or the individual you're talking to is exchanging their time in exchange for you telling them about whatever that product is.
Hmm.
Um, we'll take TV because TV, everyone understands TV. I use the example of like insurance ads. Insurance ads, they don't really have anything interesting to tell you. Everyone knows what insurance is. And yes, they can compete on price to some extent, but they're almost all comedy at this point, right? And that's the value exchange for the advertiser. Like they have made you laugh.
Hmm.
Right.
Yep.
I'm curious as to that, and I don't have any psychological. I just noticed that. How would you describe that in more scientific terms?
Yeah, so there's different ways that we remember things. There's different synapses in the brain that create these neural pathways. And so what they're doing is they're using humor, right? You have some people who use influencers, famous people, celebrities. You have some that pull on your heartstrings and they're really emotional and dramatic. But that comedy, you're associating that laugh and that smile, right? And we've all heard different statistics about, you know, different chemicals that are released in the brain that make us happy when we smile, or what happens when we hug someone for more than 6 seconds. They're triggering that chemical release in the brain, and that is then becoming mentally associated with their brand. And
Yeah.
so that's why those things work because you aren't even aware down the road when you're ready for new insurance or you want to get a new price, or most likely you had a really crappy experience with your current insurance and you're ready to switch. Again, you're not cognitively going, oh, I just really love those progressive commercials, but
Yeah.
your brain is,
Yeah. Your brain
the
is.
hidden brain is,
Yeah.
and that's how that marketing works or the advertising works.
Yeah. And I promise we will talk about discounts. We're getting there. I'm kind of setting the stage for some things here. But so let's um, pull on that thread some more and talk about at the retail level brand recall, right? So we when in marketing you have your funnel, right? You have awareness, engagement, purchase, or consider. They'll just put it in those three buckets. So awareness, consideration, purchase. One of the things that a lot of newer marketers come to the table with is they just want to focus on the very bottom of the funnel and they want to look for um, they want to try to intercept people when they're on their way to purchase, right? Because that is easier to do. That's why Google search works very well for many businesses. Someone is looking for
Right.
the product already and you can intercept them while they're doing that. If you go up the level, though, is that if you're going to build a real brand, you need to make more people aware of your product than are currently looking for it. And this is like a big topic of conversation that we have to get into. And a lot of it is constrained budgets inside of a smaller industry like cannabis. So there's not a lot of budget to go out and do big brand awareness campaigns. But um, we do that. Your media gel, we do a lot of top of funnel and drive it down to conversion as well. But sometimes it's difficult to explain to someone the value of brand recall in the sense
Mhm.
that there's a reason why Coca-Cola still advertises. And how do you talk about the psychology and that subconscious part of your brain that someone is seeing this ad a dozen times in a context that is positive and then goes into a retail store and they're presented with a lot of options and what part of their brain is saying, "Oh, that one over there, you should
Mm.
is but familiar." I don't know, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to go into some heavy brain speak here.
Yeah.
So we're again going to be talking about neural pathways, but also a thing called neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to repave neural pathways. So, like we said earlier, those laughs associated with the image of that brand and even the jingles and the colors, the voice actors, those things, they're all paving this path. Well, it takes time. It's just like if you were to go walk the same path in your yard every day. If you do it once or twice, you go in the mailbox and you come back, sure, maybe the grass is like kind of down a little bit, but within a couple of hours, it's gone. Now, if you take that path every single day and you take that same path to go to the mailbox, to go to the park, to walk your kids to the bus stop, and you're back and forth, pretty soon that grass is going to permanently be laid down. It may start to die. It turns into dirt. That's what happens with a neural pathway. Coca-Cola has a beautifully paved highway through your brain,
Yeah.
right? The lines are sharp. It's the one you want to go, even if it takes you an extra 10 minutes on your trip, you're getting on the Coca-Cola highway.
Mm.
If they stop that, other people, right, start creating these different paths. And maybe one day you decide to take that path and take that path. And then that, you see what I'm saying? That traffic
Yeah.
starts to go away. So it's the same thing with your top of funnel or your brand exposure. Sure, you want to go grab those people at the bottom of the funnel and convert them, but you need to build a sustainable pipeline throughout, and you need to understand how the customers are going through there. And to do that, you have to keep paving that. You have to keep walking that path over and over and over and over again, especially in a space like cannabis, where there's I don't know. Do you have a number for how many paths there would be? A lot, a lot, a lot of paths.
Yeah, it's an interesting space because there's not really national brands yet. There's a couple that
Yeah.
are you could consider national if you are working inside of the space, but if you go on the street of Miami, New York, San Francisco, Chicago, and ask them to name three cannabis brands, they're not going to say the same things. They may not even say three, right?
Hmm.
Um, so that is that's a frontier really in this category. So there are not the highways yet. We're still
Yeah.
on interconnected railroads, right? Is what's happening today. And so, but that will happen. There will be national
Right.
brands.
Right.
It will be some combination of the brands that have been created by new businesses,
Mhm.
large companies that are going to come in when it's a little easier to operate from a legal perspective, or somewhere in the middle, right? And it's been interesting to watch this play out because we've seen some brands, and in California specifically, which is a little earlier and a lot of money went into it. There were some pretty well-funded brands that have disappeared at this point,
Mm.
for a number of reasons, which is a whole other long conversation. But I really like that analogy. I also can see a visual of, the unmaintained road just on
Yeah.
its own starts to fall apart, right?
Yes, absolutely. Well, and with knowing this, right? Like in knowing this about your space, what better time to start paving your own road?
Yeah,
Because if somebody does get that kind of traction, especially if you're a smaller one who has to pave the road by walking it back and forth versus someone like a Coca-Cola or a national brand, when they get going, they're going to have the resources to bring out a whole crew to clear the road, to pave the road, to maintain the road. That's a whole different type of competition.
yeah.
And so I think to your point, for anyone who's watching this right now, like don't sleep on that. Sustainable growth is having the foresight to know how you need to build for the future. And yes, one-off sales or those, the recurring sales that you have are important, but if that starts to taper away, then what happens to the rest of your business? The foundation's going to crumble. So yeah, pave the way now.
Well, yeah, it's never going to get cheaper than it
Yeah.
is right now,
Yeah.
is the other thing. All right, so let's actually talk about discounts and psychology a little bit. Within the cannabis retail space, discounts have been, you almost can't get away from them, right? Because, like, let's say California, there are too many brands, right? A lot of people started brands. Everybody thought it was going to be easy to start a brand, and so they did. So then you ended up with a bunch of brands and operators where they just were competing on discounts of like, okay, it's 20% off, now it's 30% off, now it's
Mm-hmm.
50%. Um, and that's been the primary both retention and new customer acquisition lever that the brands have had to work with, partially because they've had difficulty doing advertising
Mm-hmm.
in many mediums. I mean, we've essentially solved that at this point and have for a few years. We can get cannabis advertised pretty much on any digital publication or app at this
Right.
point. But that doesn't stop the fact that everyone else is still doing it, right? So you're left with some difficult decisions when you're trying to sell your product of, well, if you're selling this product at, $50 and someone else is selling it for $30 down the road, how do you compete with that? Um, and I want to go into two things. One is we'll start with how discount this mental label of a discounted brand
Mm-hmm.
sits with people. And then I want to talk about sort of a longer term about the sort of the brand equity. But let's start with, have you done research in this category of like offering discounts as marketing and what that
Mm-hmm.
means to people?
Yeah, yeah. From a psychological standpoint, absolutely. So, those discounts create a quick dopamine hit. They give people instant gratification. And then on the business side, obviously, even if you cut into your profit margin, a lot of times the volume will supersede and you'll see a spike. So in
Mhm.
the short term, seems like a good option. However, in the long term, it's quite detrimental. So if you're a brand that wants to be around for a while, then there's a lot of considerations to kind of hold space for. What I want to start with is not trying to say get rid of discounting altogether. do this type of discounting versus that. Every business, even within the space, is going to be a little bit unique in its own way, but it's about kind of ruthlessly niching down your brand and your customer experience. And that kind of reverse engineers what all you want to do, right? So if the place down the street offers the product cheaper and the
Mhm.
person is solely looking for price, okay. But if your environment offers more value, if your customer service is better, if let's say you are more focused on like a wellness aspect, or there's another piece of the value that you're trying to offer, you walk into that store and that person remembers you. They have a way of knowing kind of what you've purchased before and what you're trying to achieve through, you're putting this product in your body.
Mhm.
So you've got lots of things to consider. Sure, there's going to be a segment of people who only care about price. There's going to also be a segment of people who care about quality, who care about um, feeling special, right? You've got a bunch of different pieces to that. And so, what are you providing there from that standpoint? The long-term effects of deep discounting are a couple. One, it's very hard to build trust that way because our brains are hardwired that cheap is low quality, right?
Yeah.
It's cheap. It's the reason it's called cheap. And then because there's no trust building there, it's really hard for brand loyalty. So a lot of people are familiar with the experiment of Pavlov's dogs, right? Where he rang the bell, they came to eat, he rang the bell, da da da. He takes the food away, they still salivate at the bell. You're
Right.
creating a Pavlov's dog situation if your only value as a brand is your discount. And what you're actually doing is training your audience to go shop around. Hey, the only thing we have to offer you is a good price. So go wherever you need to go. I have a friend who just told me the other day, he goes, "Oh, I just came up with a life hack. I found out that if I order from DoorDash and then I wait, I can go order from Uber Eats. And if I wait, like, I don't remember how many days or whatever, I get a discount from DoorDash to come back. So then if I go use them, then Uber Eats does the same thing." He's like, "My food's the same no matter what." He has
Yeah.
no brand loyalty. That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous game to play if you want to sustainably grow and manage brand.
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick tangent on that particular topic. So you've got DoorDash. I have Uber Eats, right?
Hmm.
So they got me because I use Uber also for like
Okay.
transportation when I travel. And then they tied the things together and tied the point system together, right? So
Hmm.
that was an effective way to lock me into one particular service because they
Exactly.
had they had an angle on another one, right?
Yep.
And there's actually two different categories here, specifically in the cannabis space. There's retailers and there's brands, right? And there is some overlap because some retailers have their own house brands and there's, some nuances there. But generally, if you look at it from a brand lens, the brands are competing against other brands, and some brands are discounting, right? And there are grades of quality and in there. But what would you say to someone who has a quality product, right? It's not necessarily, it shouldn't necessarily have to be a value product, like the actual quality of the product is there,
Right.
but they found themselves stuck in this like discount swamp, right? Where they've been forced to do that and they want to
Mhm.
figure out a way to build real brand equity and brand loyalty. What kind of tools would you recommend for them to navigate out of that psychologically?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing there is it takes time to build these behaviors. It's going to take time to reverse or change these behaviors. I never recommend just a hard stop. That's not a great approach.
Yeah.
So to slowly weed your way out of it. So if you run a deep discount sale once a month, try every other month. Try once a quarter, bake it out. The other piece of this is communication. Open dialogue. These are people. They come into your store. They may buy online as well, but like there's an interaction happening here. Be transparent with them, right? You don't have to give away the whole farm. There are certain things that consumers don't need to know, but authenticity builds trust. Even if that authenticity is honest in the fact that, like, hey, we really appreciate you all. we're trying to up level whatever. We want to increase our services to you. As part of this, we're going to be, you're going to notice some changes. At the same time, a lot of times we use deep discounting to get people in the door when in fact, we should be using discounting to support the people who've been loyal to your brand,
Yeah.
right? And so creating this shift, we're like, sure, maybe there's some introductory pricing. Maybe there's some discounted add-ons. There's ways to offer discounts that aren't just slashing your entire profit margin. And then on the reverse side, you know, give something back to the people who do religiously come to you, who are willing to pay a little bit more money because they want to come to your shop. They want to go to your store.
Yeah. And I've seen, what about the concept of building a brand variation? And I see people do this either in both directions, right? Your premium
Mhm.
brand also offers a value brand that's a slightly different name, but is clearly associated with
Yeah.
them. Or the reverse. You've been stuck in like, we'll just say there's low, middle, and high end tiers, right?
Yeah.
For cannabis products. So you're just kind of stuck in the middle. You don't necessarily want to go in the value game because that's hard to do effectively.
Right.
If I were to say like, okay, I've got a middle tier brand, I've got, some amount of brand awareness, we have customers, we have distribution. I want to create a brand because there are brands within the cannabis space that don't do discounts, right?
Hmm.
There's not a lot of them, but there's some that are like, we are ultra premium and we are twice as much as everyone else, and that's just how it is.
Yep.
Um, how would you go about giving someone's advice of should they just make a more expensive version of their existing brand or make something that is a slight variation or make an entirely new brand if they wanted to step up? Or do you think there is a way to take a mid-tier brand and raise the prices back up?
Yeah, I do think that I mean, there's different options, right? But I do think that there's a way to take a mid-tier and to move it back up. But it also includes increasing the experience, enhancing the experience. And so if it's the same product, the same packaging, the same everything, and you just increase the price depending on how much you do, right? You're probably going to see a drop off. So what I would say is, what else comes with it? Is there a shift in the packaging and the presentation? I mean, I, for one, if you lay out something in front of me, I want something that's packaged a little nicer. Like I get really excited. Like I will go leave a 5-star review so fast if your packaging was a surprise and delight. So what are the other pieces? Price is one thing. What are the other pieces of the experience with that brand and product that you can up level it? So that would be, I mean, that's not a hard and fast example for you, just because as far as the actual nuances of the cannabis space, but from a psychology standpoint, you still have to give something in return. But that something doesn't always just have to be the product itself.
Yeah. A close analogy would be kind of the wine industry, right? Where
Mhm.
you've got different tiers of products. The price spread isn't quite as extreme as it is in wine, where you have
Right.
an object that is this one is $4 and this one's $400.
Yeah.
It's more like this is $25 and this is $75, right? Just kind of
Right.
more of like a realistic spread for pricing. And so, what changes happen in someone psychologically when they're thinking about something as a value or discounted product versus a premium brand? Like,
Hmm.
what you if we can get into the actual chemistry happening there.
Yeah. So, and what's interesting that you use wine because there's actually a lot of really good research specifically in wine when using those products because there's actually a breaking point, right? You may already know this, where the wine is effectively the same.
Mhm.
But what it is it's that connection, it's that hardwiring connected to our value aspiration again. It's our aspiration, our expectations of what's on the other side of the bridge offered by the product or service.
Yeah.
So with wine, right? And I've been on both ends of the wine game, way less times on the higher end. But I'll tell you, when I bought that wine on the higher end, it didn't matter if it tasted like crap because I was most likely buying it because of how I felt about myself. I had a promotion or was celebrating, an anniversary or something along those lines. That lower tier, right? I just want something. Whatever. We just
Yeah.
buy it and be done with it. So it's this connection to ourself that is connected to the price. The product can be the exact same thing and you price it differently, and you're going to actually be able to see the difference in the people who buy it because that's a reflection of themselves.
And then how does, because both the wine is a good parallel here because they're both cannabis and wine are both products that are frequently shared with other people.
Hmm.
And there's definitely when you're going to like a dinner party and you're going to bring something to that party, you generally buy something better than you would normally
Yes.
because now that you're associating that product with yourself, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And you're buying it because again, it's a reflection of who you are. It's a reflection of who you want to feel like and be like in that moment. If I want to feel like I'm having like this nice self-care rewarding, I'm not going to buy a $10 bottle of wine. I'm not a $10 bottle of person. Like, I'm going to buy something nicer. There's a little bit of that packaging too that comes into play because I still think that that's in the product world very you put two bottles of wine next to each other and throw me some like metallic finish on the label. Oh, sure, I'll give you $5 extra.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was fancy and I'm feeling fancy. Like,
yeah.
and so it really is. It's all that reflection. It's very emotionally driven. And sometimes I get pushback or friction when I really anchor it in emotion because people are like, that's too woo-woo. But again, we're talking 95% subconscious brain making the decisions. It's emotional. It's 100% emotional.
When you say 95% of like, I'm looking at a wall of products, are you saying that the one that you pull off the shelf and purchase, 95% of that is subconsciously?
Hmm. Yep,
Okay, well, that's interesting. Now, okay, so now we've got a pie and like almost all of it is subconscious.
exactly.
Are there sub slices in there of like different parts of the unconscious that are like addressable from a marketing perspective?
Yeah. So remember all those neural pathways we're paving?
Yeah.
Information in the brain travels faster on a deeper paved neural pathway, just like a highway. You're going to move faster in a car on a highway than you are trudging through your grass on foot.
Okay.
But more the neural pathway is paved, the faster the information gets there, right? And this is why when we're scanning, our brain is taking in so much information when we're looking at the wall of products, we cannot possibly pinpoint exactly everything that's happening. We will reach for the one that has the best paved pathway.
Is that
Now, oh, sorry.
is that the same mechanism that is coming into play? Like, let's say I'm looking at a menu. There's a bunch of
Mhm.
things on there. I'm like, well, that might be good. That might be good. But I know that that's good or that particular dish. And so especially if you're short on time, you're like, oh, I'm just going to go to that one then. Is
Mhm.
that the
Yeah.
same mechanism?
It's similar. That's called familiarity bias. So
Okay.
there's some pretty technical names when you get into it. It's all in that 95%. But yeah, familiarity bias is what you're discussing. And it actually, another good example outside of product base, if you walk into a room full of people
Mhm.
and there's an option at a table to sit next to someone who you really don't like, right? Or sit next to a complete stranger, you are more likely to sit next to the person you don't like because you at least know what to expect.
That's interesting.
We don't like the unknown. We humans don't like the unknown, right? And so, but what's interesting is that, especially in a space that's new, right? Like cannabis, new-ish, or in a space where there's not as much education and you're still establishing brands, there's different parts of familiarity that you can, yes, you want to pave that pathway, top of funnel, but what are ways that you can add other pieces into it? What's the color of the packaging? What is the font? What is the language? Like, I don't, what is there's some of them you can read the labels and stuff. What kind of language are you using? There's
Mhm.
different ways to align with already existing neural pathways to where you're grabbing that.
So where would someone start to think about that? Let's say, okay, I'm going to redesign my packaging. I want to give it a fresh look. I want it to be a little more premium. I don't want to rely on discounts as much to drive sales. Where would you even start to think about how can I align my aesthetics with neural pathways that are going to be beneficial for me?
Yeah. So one of the coolest things that I like to do for people is to put them in the position of just different branding that they're experiencing. So let's go high end. Let's think luxury brands. If you just go do a quick Google image search of luxury brands, you're going to see a lot of black and white. You're going to
Yep.
see maybe some silvers and golds, very monotone, very sleek. There's a little bit of like ambiguity in it, like, creating a little bit of, I totally lost track of words here, but mystery, right? Like you want to know what's behind there. Um, as you move your way down, different colors do different things. If you're looking in the realm of tech companies and stuff like that, you see a lot of blues,
Yep.
right? It's very calming, but it's confident. And then if you move into your colorful, playful brands, different clothing retailers, and things like that. So those colors do different things. So that's a great place to start. Color psychology is great. The internet's amazing. You can go find color psychology palette stuff all over the place. But that's what I would say is think about the other brands you want the people to use. Think about what they actually look like and sound like when they come in. What brand of clothing are they wearing? What kind of car are they driving? What kind of watch, if they wear a watch, what kind of phone? And it's really easy to go do research now and figure out, okay, show me all the brands that are in this space, and you're going to see commonalities. You want to align with that.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess that also goes into like brand archetypes as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, does it mean like, let's say your brand aesthetic, you want to be playful, Austin Powers brand.
Oh.
My Bluetooth just decided to pick up. I don't know where it came from. Um, is there a way to, because none of that really screams luxury the way
Right.
we were talking about in like the sort of default sense. Um, how would someone who has a whimsical brand still try to convey more of a high-end luxury type of price point?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Where I go to first is actually picturing what the experience looks like. Like, what is the person looking for? So, for instance, if I'm looking for something that's calm and settling, right? Maybe you want more earth tones, you would want something more muted. Whereas, okay, well, what if you want to have a good time? Or what if you want to be super happy? Like those things, those colors become bolder,
Mhm.
right? And so there's lots of different ways that you can use color. You can have accent colors. And then your font has a lot to do with it too. If we're talking packaging, you script font versus bold font. But really there's different ways to do that because at the same time that luxury brands are more muted, they're also a little stiffer. They don't have as much personality. Is that really applicable to your brand and your product and what you want people experiencing? And so I always try to kind of reverse engineer that experience. Um, if that answers your
Yeah,
question.
it does. It does. And I think maybe that's a good segue into, I know we were chatting earlier and you mentioned you've got a process or a worksheet or
Hmm.
maybe you could talk a little bit about that, how that
Yeah.
functions.
Yeah. So I put together a resource for everyone that I think you guys will send out later, but it basically is kind of helping you to identify where to even start. And so there's a couple of things that I've mentioned on the call so far. One is that value aspiration. So that's the idea of not just your value proposition, but where that audience wants to be and how you get them there. And there's another thing, I don't know if I've said it verbatim so far, but we've talked a lot about the customer experience. And a
Mhm.
lot of times in marketing, you hear the term customer journey,
Yep,
right?
all the time.
And all the time, customer journey.
Yep.
The bone that I have to pick with customer journey is that it's typically shown in a very linear sense.
Hmm.
And that's just not the world we live in. And so I use the term customer continuum, where I use the decision-making model because as human beings, there's really only a handful of proven ways in which, we make these decisions based off of science. But we also know there's just noise. everywhere, and we're going to come and go in all these different places. So the customer continuum is about kind of wrapping your arms around your business's marketing and your journey, your experience, and aligning it with that decision-making model. So the resource that I've put together is 4 questions about the value aspiration. Very simple questions.
Yep.
If you answer no, then there's 4 different ways for you to actually take this and implement it into your business. Same for the customer continuum. So it's designed to help you maybe identify some gaps into some things you haven't thought about. I will tell you, it's all very much so rooted in psychology. It will require you to think a little bit and put yourself in the position of your customer. And honestly, when you do that, psychology is just a fancy way of saying like people are peopling. It's just
Yeah.
how we all think. We can get into that headspace because thankfully we're all people. So that's what it's designed to do. And it's just a PDF that you can go through. It has a little bit more information too for anyone who really wants to understand the psychological principles at play.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll send that out. Um, what are some other, and I've been asking lots and lots of questions. What have I not touched on that is, in your bag of tricks to talk about when it comes to marketing and psychology?
Yeah, absolutely. So specifically when it comes to pricing,
Mhm.
there is a very interesting tool. It's pretty tried and true. I pulled it up just in case you wanted me to drop it in the chat, but um, forgive the name. It's called the Van Westendorp pricing model.
Oh, my favorite. Yes. No, I don't. I
Yes.
haven't heard of that.
Yes. I'm sure everyone has it on Post-it note. However, I just think this is fascinating. It was developed decades ago and it still works. It's a series of 4 questions
Okay.
that you can either use in a focus group, you can send it out in a survey to people, but it literally will help you zero in on your pricing. And so I can drop it in the chat, but basically it's, at you just ask people, at what point is the price so low that you think that the quality is lacking? At what price do you think that this is a bargain? I'm getting a really good deal.
Hmm.
At what price are you like, this is too expensive? Like it's getting there. And at what point are you like, absolutely not, that's astronomical. Like I wouldn't do
Yeah.
that. Based off of those answers, like, because assuming that you're giving them like a sliding scale or something,
Hmm.
they will tell you what that price point is. And then if you go through, because obviously somewhere in here, in between what's a bargain and what's a little bit too expensive, that middle point is your sweet spot. So
Okay.
if you distribute these or you do a focus group or a survey, you're going to get averages back. Can also be a really great way for the model that you were talking about, where maybe you have a low, medium, and high tier,
Yeah.
right? To really understand what that tier actually is. Um, and people will be
Have you
able to kind of give you those answers.
have you either done this yourself or seen studies of this happening in the real world in practice and someone saying, okay, we're going to put out this poll, we're selling office chairs, and this is what we found out, and how far wrong we were, because we frequently data tells us most of our assumptions are wrong, but
Yeah. Yeah, so I've got a couple of examples in different industries. So one specifically in commercial real estate. And so interestingly enough, there was a bit of a brand shift where it was like, okay, well, why aren't this company owned all these properties? Why are the ones that are cheaper not just like flying, right? Why are we not just signing them and signing them and signing them? Well, because when we looked at the portfolio, the vast majority was what's called Class A space.
yeah.
And they were like, I don't want your cheap stuff, right? And so you increased the pricing. And there were services that were added on. So when you signed on with us, we wrote a press release for your company. We distributed it out, right? Because share the love. It's the experience piece, but that didn't really cost the company anything. And so when we did this and discovered, oh, well, that's way too, it's ruining the quality of the brand. We're just going to bring everything up. Vacancy rates plummeted,
Well,
right? Yeah. I was like, did I get that right?
yeah.
Yes. Um, and so that's a really unique example in a like B2B space with commercial real estate. I've also worked with a ton of service-based companies who do this too, where they're like, I can't raise my prices. I don't want to raise my prices, da 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 da. Well, you run this and you find out, oh, well, actually, people think that you're worth 10, 20% more than what you're charging. Increase the prices. Not only do your business stay the same, you make more money and you get better clients,
Yeah.
right? And so, with a product-based world, though, I really think that from what we've seen is it gives you a better opportunity to create that low, middle, high. That allows you to do what's called anchoring. Anchor pricing, again, really common with wine, where you've got the cheap one, the medium price one, and the high one. Same company owns them all.
Mhm.
Everyone grabs the middle one, most
Yeah.
likely.
Same
It's
thing
the
with
same kind of
like
thing.
SaaS pricing.
Yep. Yep.
You go, oh, I'm going to sign up for this internet service, and they have low, medium, high. And I've actually had this conversation with people. I'm like, just construct your pricing in a way that people feel good about the middle one.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So those are some of the main things that I had kind of jotted down and just wanted to make sure that I shared with you all.
Yeah, that's interesting. It would be, I guess it wouldn't be that difficult to execute, especially for any brand that has a CRM list. You could also run
Mhm.
it. You actually run a campaign. We work with a company that actually does polls
Yeah.
as the ad unit, largely for political, right? So they run
Hmm.
the ad unit as a political, like, how do you agree or disagree on this particular topic?
Yeah.
That gets data for them. It also creates, groups for retargeting. Um, but a poll ad for a brand would be good to understand
Yeah.
that value proposition
Yep.
because it's hard as a brand when you're like, look, no matter even something is going to be 30% off on the shelf.
Hmm.
Someone or like four different competitors are going to have 20, 30, 50% off. So it's and it's hard to kind of hold your ground on that when you don't have any data to back that up. But I think that's a really good tool.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have data and you have people who just tell you, I mean, who better to listen to than your actual consumer?
Yeah, I mean, I like to go into dispensaries and like see all the products. Um, but and I'm pretty self-aware of brand stuff, so I kind of think about what's going on as I'm thinking about
Hmm.
things. I don't want the stuff in the cheap discount bin. I've got some brands that I know are good. I will usually try one or two products from brands I haven't tried before just to see
Yeah.
what's what. But some of those experiments where I've tried something and it was largely based on the packaging, like what does this look like? How is this
Yep.
brand presenting itself?
Hmm.
And some of them I had great experiences with. I'm like, this is a new staple for me. I love this product.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's complicated.
It is. It is. It's complicated, just like the human brain, man. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Well, we do have we're kind of running up on time here. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about your work, what you do, how people might be able to reach you, who should reach out to you, because I
Yeah.
know you've got a few different things that you do as an
Mhm.
individual. Um, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so as I mentioned when I first came on, I have two kind of separate entities. I have the marketing psychologist, which is where I do some coaching. So that coaching is pretty broad, actually. It's about seeing through the lens of applied psychology and whatever it is that you're trying to do. So I have entrepreneurs, executives and SMBs. Um, Actually in-house marketers who have been doing this a long time but want to know more about looking through a psychological lens. But then also just some more low price digital products, things to get you started, workbooks, stuff like that. Then I also have Mumford and Burns Consulting. I have a business partner who is a sales expert, and we do what is called full cycle sales and marketing consulting.
Okay.
So this is for people who don't necessarily have a marketing team. You want to get this stuff off the ground. You have a little bit of a bigger budget, but you don't want to do it yourself. Going to speak into the best ways to build these infrastructures, revisit what you currently have built. And everything is built based off of psychology from the ground level up, and then there's fractional services on top of that. So really a wide range. Again, a reflection of the pricing model. have different options for different people and what you're looking for. I will say I also offer free 30-minute consultations, and these are no pitch. They are come in, there's a form when you fill it out on my website, um, and answer some questions. And then I just hop on with you and we solve for that specific thing. And that's that. So there's also that option as well.
So we'll do a little either you go call it meta or inception, however you want to describe it. But
Okay.
now you have to market yourself and you are marketing expertise and psychology expertise, which is a non-physical good.
Yep.
Generally, I mean, yes, you can have packets and reading materials and stuff, but really what you're selling is expertise and guidance. That's difficult. Like
Yeah.
that's a dip. So like maybe we could wrap this up on you talking about how you thought through the process of conveying your value that
Mhm.
is non-physical, complicated, and generally going to be bought by someone that doesn't understand it in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
So
sounds hard.
yeah, it's definitely not easy. And one of the things that I will tell you is I am someone who believes in iteration. So
Okay.
I do a lot of kind of product design and launch methodology in my own work. Lots of testing, lots of changing. But I would argue that I'm not selling something intangible. I'm selling a transformation.
Okay.
Um, I am selling confidence in your business, that you are talking to the right people, that you are building emotionally engaged audiences because they, over time, buy way more than your top of funnel churn, right? And I am selling peace of mind that you're building a sustainable structure that converts people at the bottom of the funnel, brings people in the top, moves them along, and helps you understand how many people at what point you have at any given stage of that.
Okay. So, and then how long from sort of the beginning of this particular journey you're on right now, where you've decided, you're going to offer this set of services and skills to people. I don't know how long that's been, but my real question is, how different is today's messaging versus day one's messaging for you?
Oh, vastly, I would say vastly different.
Yeah.
I would say vastly different. Yeah.
And on those like gradients of change between day one and now, like how many large not pivot's the wrong word, but you there's iterations of milestones, right? There's kind of like
Mhm.
little changes, and then there's milestones of like, okay, this I need to like change this like 20 degrees or whatever it
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
versus like just changing a couple words. How many of those steps do you think it was that you've gone through?
Oh man. I'd say two or three
Yeah.
substantial shifts with another one quickly on the way.
Oh, all right. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
All
Yeah.
right.
So here's the thing. I read a great post the other day that was like, this is what I wish I would have known when I started my own company. And it
Yeah.
was like, please stop wasting all your time on things like a polished website and the perfect funnel and da 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 until you have a service or product you know people actually want to buy.
Yeah.
And the thing with what I do is it could be so broad, right? But the number one thing in business is you have to niche down.
Yes.
And so I have picked several things and they have performed well, right? But people are telling me, maybe not directly, but I watch people. I'm also an applied psychologist, so use that to my benefit. People are showing me and telling me what they really want and need in their business.
Yeah.
So, but it takes time to onboard those and bring them to market. So, you know, and I do think that after a certain amount of time, things start to stabilize. Like you'll find the things that really work for you and you may tweak them here or there. Like the consulting, that's not going anywhere. That is the easiest thing for me to sell is high ticket consulting.
Yeah. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Well,
Yeah.
usually someone has a problem that they need solved, and they're looking for a
Exactly. Yeah.
and looking for expertise. And yeah, we've hired consultants at different points in time for very specific things
Hmm.
when you're like, okay, I have a very specific problem and I can't afford to get the hiring wrong on this particular problem that needs to be solved. And it's not even necessarily something that needs to be a permanent position. It's like I'm doing this right now actually with on customer success side. Like we need to iterate some things and we need someone who has many, many years of experience and has done this many times
Right.
because we can't afford to get it wrong because
Yep.
it will be too damaging to the business, right?
Yep.
Um, so yeah, I'm curious to see what comes next. And I do like those, what I wish someone had told me in the past. Now, I will say with those, you can take five of them and they all contradict each other, right? Like
Exactly.
someone says, don't worry about your website. Someone else says your website's the most important thing ever.
Yep.
Um, I would say if people have a top 10 list, there's usually like two or three nuggets in there though
Yep.
that are good and applicable because there is some variation of what's important in different types of businesses.
Yep.
Um, I've certainly spent my entire career just recovering from a series of mistakes that I've made as an entrepreneur. I'm like, well, that didn't work. Can I recover from that?
Yep.
Um, but usually you try not to repeat the same ones. And then after you stack up enough mistakes, then you have some semblance of wisdom. At least that's my theory. So we'll see how that
I
works
think
out.
so too. What surfaced for me was like, we're all just out here selling the knowledge that we got from making the mistakes. Like,
Yeah.
hire me because I've already done it. That way you don't have to.
Yeah. I went through a lot of pain. I can help you have
Yes,
slightly less. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
learned a few things myself, which is great. And I have some things to think about. I am going to borrow your highway pathway analogies
Yes.
in the
Yeah,
future. I
please
like
do.
that. And then can you just say how do people get a hold of you? LinkedIn, Skywriter?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is my primary thought platform. Chelsea Burns, I'll show up as the marketing psychologist. I'm also on Instagram and Threads under the dot marketing dot psychologist. And
Okay.
my website is the dash marketing dash psychologist.com.
Great. Dash. Easier to say than hyphen.
Yeah, yeah.
Underscore hyphen backslash.
None of that.
Um, None of that. Great. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been at least for me, fascinating episode of Cannabis Marketing Live. Chelsea, have a fantastic day, and we'll chat soon.
Great. Same to you.